Alright guys, we're going to have a little talk today about the history of electronic collars. We had a question from one of our viewers in Romania, Catalin, wanting to know what the history of electronic collars was. And I do want to tell you guys, electronic collars are really pure Americana. They were developed in the American field for American field trial Labradors, which is an animal, superior to any on earth. So that's kind of where it developed, and it's really why in Europe and stuff they're not familiar with this, and a lot of European countries have banned electronic collars, and they just completely do not understand them. So we're just going to talk today a little bit about the history of the electronic collar. So they were originally developed back in the 60s, where they had, I'm guessing, some of these good old boy types. And remember, you guys, necessity is the mother of invention. So they said, I'm sure it was something like, if only I had some way I could get that dog, that was off chasing a rabbit or doing something they didn't want it to do. So they had, and I'm guessing these guys didn't go to MIT, but they invented these collars that were, huge, actually, and, would just, deliver punishment was basically what it was. So I'm sure they did get some gratification from that. So that was back in the 60s. They continued on with that for a while. And then in the 70s, the American field trial became even more sophisticated than it already was. So you had a lot of trainers using these collars in a different way in the American field. So the collars began to evolve, and then in the 80s, in the beginning of the 80s, they really, Tritronics hired a guy named Dr. Daniel Tortora, who was a PhD in behavioral science, to kind of help them develop collars that would be able to be used in a different way. And they had some of these field trial trainers, Rex Carr, Roy Gonya. A lot of these guys worked with Tritronics to help them develop a collar that could be used in a better way. And actually the original collars they had, they used to come up with crazy things like put pieces of cloth between the dog's neck and the collar, as a way to, sort of tamper it down, rather than, I don't know why they just didn't invent something better. So anyway, with that, they started, to develop a better kind of collar. They came out with something called an A190 that could used continuous, and they started using it in a way where teach the dog to turn off the stimulus. So the timing of the stimulus was completely different, rather than wait until it does something wrong and then hit the continuous. And back then they coined a term called the nick, meaning to just hold the button down real quick. Again, why they didn't invent something quicker that, just did that on its own. Eventually they made a pre-timed nanosecond that became the nick, but the term was actually coined as a way just to say, just to tap it real quick. So anyway, time went on, they continued to use them. They continued to use them for field trial dogs. It was certainly not anything widely accepted, in the mainstream public or anything. So then you're looking at, then the 90s came around. It was getting more and more sophisticated. People were starting to see there was a market, that these kind of things could be applied, to pet dogs or whatever. So a lot of different collar companies started springing up, but even still back then, they still didn't have a collar with a little dial on it like this. You had to constantly be changing the contact points to change the level of the stimulus, which is ridiculous. We could put a man on the moon, but they couldn't figure out anything better than that. And even then, the collars were still kind of big. So back in 1997, Dogtra came into play with the help of Jim and Phyllis Dobbs. They developed these collars, and the original Dogtra collar was way bigger than this, you guys, but it did have the pager, and that was kind of, just a new beginning as far as being able to be more widely accepted. As time went on through the 90s, through the late 90s, the collars got smaller and smaller until, we're down to this size right here, and we still had range and was still effective. So anyway, now we're at the point we're at now, and you're still going to have these little bastions of phobia of these people. Oh, it's something terrible. And it really isn't, you guys. We've got a whole new generation of kids that are growing up that are understanding how these collars work, and you've got a lot of really talented trainers using them. They're continually used in American field trials, to be able to have that kind of control at a distance, you've got to have that. There isn't any other way. So anyway, that was just kind of a brief history of the electronic collar according to Kelly, and if you guys have any input, let me know. See ya. Bye.